Okay, yes, I'm in favor of that. But then once they get it passed, it rapidly changes.
In this video, Peter Schiff explains why government policies aimed at helping struggling individuals, like providing first-time homebuyers with a $25,000 credit and taxing unrealized gains, are not only misguided, but will actually make things worse. Schiff argues that these policies will drive up housing prices and hurt the economy, while unconstitutional taxes on unrealized gains will force people to sell off assets, destroying capital accumulation and damaging the economy. He also highlights how government interventions, like price controls, fail to lower prices and instead create inflation and economic chaos. Schiff makes the case for why we should trust the free market rather than government interference.
Well, first of all, just giving people money to buy houses, again, apart from being unconstitutional, which it is, it's just going to increase housing demand. People are going to take that money and use it to bid up houses, and so prices are going to go up. And so if the problem is that housing prices are too high, giving people money to buy houses is just going to make those prices even higher. So it is a foolish, misguided policy that is going to worsen the very problem that they're trying to solve. The real solution is to get the government out of the housing market completely. They've been very involved in it for a long time. It really started under FDR, but all these programs to make homes more affordable have backfired and made them a lot more expensive, which is exactly what the government does. So that is the worst possible policy, other than maybe this tax on unrealized gains, which, number one, again, would also be unconstitutional, because they want to try to tax unrealized gains as if they are income, but they are not income. They are unrealized gains. That is not income. Income is a realized gain. You have to sell something and receive more than you paid for it to have income that is subject to tax under the 16th Amendment. See, the reason we have a 16th Amendment is because the Constitution basically prohibited an income tax, a direct tax, unless it was apportioned. And the government, didn't want to apportion it for all sorts of reasons, because the founding fathers didn't want direct taxes. They wanted direct taxes in emergencies like a war. So they made it very difficult for the government to lay a direct tax, which is a tax that the people have to pay directly to the government, as opposed to an excise tax, which they thought the government would run on, which is like a sales tax, tax on alcohol, tobacco, gas. You buy a product, the tax is there, you pay it, easy. You don't need an accountant. You don't need to, file a return. You don't need to, risk going to jail, right? It's very simple to pay an excise tax. So that was how the government was supposed to run. Well, when they initially wanted to impose the income tax, politicians said, look, we'll tax the rich, and the middle class won't have to pay taxes anymore. We'll get rid of the tariffs that you guys have been paying, and we're going to tax the Carnegies and the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, this income tax. And so that's how we got it, because the public voted for a tax they didn't believe they would ever have to pay. But of course, now the middle class pays taxes that nobody would have imagined Carnegie and Rockefeller and Vanderbilt would have paid. The initial tax was, I think, capped at 4% on the billionaires, right? It was a tiny little tax. But the 16th Amendment is what authorized it, but it has to be on income. So the only direct tax that can be constitutionally levied without apportionment is an income tax. So now, if the government says, we're going to try to tax the unrealized gains that you have on an asset that you own, that is not an income tax. That is a property tax. They're taxing your stocks, they're taxing real estate, they're taxing the asset that has appreciated. So that is completely unconstitutional. But now, let's assume that they do it anyway, right? And the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, doesn't strike it down. It would be a complete disaster to impose that type of tax, because it would destroy the economy. Because anybody that owns these appreciated assets would be forced to sell the assets to pay the tax. And you would destroy the accumulated capital of the country. The key to capitalism is capital. You want to allow capital to accumulate because that's, drives the economy. That's what helps produce all the goods and services is the fact that we have capital. But if we have to destroy the capital so that we can pay a tax to the government, we're just, turning all that capital into consumption. So it would be highly inflationary. It would be very economically destructive. Lots of people would try to figure out how to get the hell out of the country. Nobody would want to start a business here anymore. Nobody would want to own assets here anymore. It would be a horrible tax economically, even, apart from the fact that it's illegal to actually do it. But and again, if they do pass something like this, remember, it's the camel's nose under the tent. That's always how a new tax is sold. It's sold to the voter with a promise that you won't have to pay it. Here is a new tax that some rich guy is going to pay, and it's not going to cost you anything. So that now the very people who were told they wouldn't have to pay the tax are the ones that pay the most. The middle class suffers the biggest burden from a tax that they never were even going to pay. And in fact, the withholding tax didn't even start until the Second World War. So even though we passed the income tax in 1913, nobody had taxes withheld from their pay until 1943. And that was because we were fighting a war. And so the government said, hey, we need to do this temporarily because, we got to fight this war. We need the money. And so we got that temporary withholding tax. And of course, we still have it. Here it is 2024. And people are still having taxes withheld from their pay. But again, this is why, if we tied voting to taxation, that would be another way you could do it. Because it's very easy to vote for a tax that you're not going to have to pay. Because that's really like voting for theft. A politician says, yeah, vote for me and I'm going to steal money from this rich guy and give it to you. Well, okay, right. Whose vote do you lose? Well, I lose the vote of the rich guy, but there's not as many of those as there are the people who are going to get the stolen money. And so that's what happens. But all these policies that she's proposing on top of the price gouging. There is no price gouging. The prices are set by supply and demand. The prices are what the prices are. Especially supermarkets. Supermarkets, grocery stores are highly competitive. They have razor thin margins. Nobody could gouge because they would go out of business. You go shop someplace else. Every supermarket is trying to give the customer the best deal they possibly can. So prices are low. But the reason they've gone up is because the government's created inflation. And so prices have got to go up when the government creates inflation. If the supermarkets or grocery stores didn't raise their prices, they'd go out of business. And in fact, that's what these price controls would do. They would result in a lot of grocery stores going out of business, especially in the inner cities, in the communities where they have higher costs. There's higher insurance, higher crime, higher minimum wages. Those are going to be the first stores to shut down. And so, the food's not going to be there. Right? There's not going to be any, again, you're going to have to wait in line for a long time because they're going to end up rationing what food they have left. And to the extent that you really want to get something, you're going to buy it illegally on the black market. And, it's going to cost a lot more. So everything that she has proposed is just going to make the problems worse. The high cost of housing, the high cost of food is because of the government creating inflation. And everything Harris wants to do is to create even more inflation. Right? In fact, that was the biggest irony, was the Inflation Reduction Act was an act to increase inflation. There's no truth in legislating, right? If there was, they'd all be in jail for the Inflation Reduction Act because it's false advertising. It's lying. The Inflation Reduction Act increased inflation because it expanded the money supply. They voted for the government to spend more money that the Fed was going to have to print, right? So that was the Creation Act. In fact, it was really the Green New Deal relabeled so the public would accept it. And now they want to claim credit. Hey, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah, that was just the title, right? In fact, if you want to know what a government bill is going to do, just read the title and then it's the opposite. Like if they pass tax simplification, it's going to make taxes a lot more complicated. They tend to put a title on a bill that is the opposite of what the bill is actually going to achieve. Well, first of all, in order for the government to try to figure out what the price should be of any given item, because first of all, there's so many different items on the shelf, right? So some government bureaucratic board is going to have to be appointed and they're going to have to figure out what the price of a banana should be, or what the price of, a can of Coca-Cola should be, or, all these different items. Who's going to do that? How much is that going to cost? And then how are the supermarkets going to comply with these rules and regulations? How are they going to prove to the government that the prices they're charging are, within what their requirements are? All of this is going to cost a lot of money to administer. Where's that money going to come from? Where are the grocery stores going to get all the money? They're going to have to hire a bunch of people now to fill out forms and to keep track of numbers and to get the permission from the government to charge. Where they get all that money? They got to raise their prices. So anything that the government does that imposes more regulation on a business is going to result in prices for whatever business is being regulated. But also, they don't need to do that. They can't do that. We already have something called supply and demand, and we have competition. Those things together set prices, and it prevents somebody from ripping off the customer. Because while I don't think everybody is smart enough to vote, I do think everybody is smart enough to shop. You see, the people who want everybody to vote think the people are a bunch of idiots and the government has to protect them from everything. I think they're smart enough not to shop at a grocery store that's overcharging, right? So, you're a consumer, right? You have choice. There's a free market. And if one grocery store is too expensive, you won't shop there. You'll go someplace else, right? And in fact, you got the internet now. You can shop around. You can see where the prices are the best. So it's competition that is going to make sure no one gets ripped off. When the government comes in, everybody gets ripped off. Everybody gets ripped off by the government. Instead of Kamala Harris worried about non-existent price gouging by the free market, she should worry about the actual gouging that's being done by the government on the people. The people are being gouged with inflation and taxes, and they have no way around it, right? The government creates it. In the free market, it's all voluntary. Nobody can exploit me. No one can gouge me because nobody owns my business. I can take my business anywhere I want. I'm going to go to the company that offers me the best deal, the highest quality, the lowest price. That's where I'm going, right? And the market is going to make sure. But with the government, when they have power and they have the guns, I don't have a choice, right? I have to pay their inflation tax no matter what. If they tax my income, even if I get a lousy deal, I can't opt out, right? I'm paying the tax. I'm being forced to pay that tax. So the government takes my money by force. A grocery store gets my money because I volunteered to give it to them. They didn't force me. They didn't come to my house with a gun and force me to shop at their store and pay their prices. They convinced me to stop at their store because they had the best prices, or they had the cleanest aisles, or the shortest line, or whatever it was that caused me to go to that grocery store. I went there voluntarily. I could have gone to any other store, but I chose the one that I went to. I'm not going to choose the one that's ripping me off, right? Nobody is that dumb, but the government somehow thinks we're all that dumb, and we're all going to make dumb decisions unless they come in and protect us, yet we're all smart enough to vote. Right? We're too dumb to know where to buy groceries, but we know how to pick the president. See, I think it's the opposite. We're smart enough to know how to buy groceries, but everybody shouldn't be picking the president.